Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion today about digitization, reopening, and internal operations. We're just going to wait a couple minutes for attendees to file in. We'll just wait probably about 3 minutes, and then we'll get started. For those of you who just joined in, we're waiting to about 2:33 to actually start, since we have people filing in. So just be patient with us, and we'll get going in just about 2 minutes. Okay, we'll start in about 10 seconds for the last few people who want to join us this afternoon. All right, it seems like a good time to start. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to start off with our agenda today. For those who don't know me, my name is Peter Siegel. I'm one of the principal owners of Digital Transitions and Pixel Acuity, and the founder of Digital Transitions Division of Cultural Heritage. Today I'm serving as the moderator and timekeeper for this panel discussion. First off, I'd like to give one of our attendees from the last COVID panel, Angela Warwala, the University of Chicago-Urbana, who came to us after the first panel discussion to discuss the need to have an open dialogue and another panel about internal operations of coastal institutions during this time and so forth. Unfortunately, she couldn't get to the panel today, but we will certainly miss her. I'd also like to thank our three expert panelists who agreed to serve on the panel, and I'll introduce them a little bit later. And obviously, a huge thank you to our attendees who will be coming to our Project Lemonade events and so forth. You know, I know the topic of COVID is getting a little bit long in the tooth. It's obviously, we're all getting a bit oversaturated through media, through work, through everything. We're in the middle of the summer. This is going on too long. I totally get it. But, you know, we're still in it. And we do think it's valuable that we do have this discussion. And I appreciate you all joining us today. I'd also like to give a special thanks to our marketing and events team who put this all together. And I want to give a warm welcome to Carson, who is our newest member of the DT Pixel team. Carson is pretty brand new to us, and he's going to help. He's somewhere in the background doing stuff to make sure this runs smoothly, and he's helping out with our marketing and events team. And obviously, a special thank you to Caitlin, who goes by Kate, but I call her Caitlin. I don't know why, but I just do, for putting this all together. And obviously to our knob chatter, Jay, who's going to be handling stuff as well on the back end, which I'll get to in a second. So just a couple quick bits of housekeeping. If there are specific questions that are not asked that you want answered, let's try to save them to the end of this discussion during the Q&A, where our knob generally reads the questions through the posts, then presents them out to the panelists. And you can ask the question to a specific panelist or to the group in general, and then we can take it forward from there. The last tiny bit of housekeeping is a little bit of social media. If you folks don't mind, you can tweet us, Instagram us at PixelCutie, as well as and so forth. The digital transition stuff is not. Oh, there it is. Digital transitions in PixelCutie. I'm sorry, my error. You'll see all our Twitter and Instagram handles right there on this page. So that said, let's move on to meet our great panelists today. We went a little fast here. I'm not sure what's going on. Let me back up. I promise you that wasn't me. One of our first panelists is Ruel Munoz. I've known Ruel for a long time, and I'm very appreciative to have him here today. Maybe we could turn Ruel's camera on so we can see him live. Ruel is currently the Princeton University's Library Imaging Manager of the Digitization of the Digital Imaging Studio as part of PUL's IT. So I assume that's Princeton University Libraries IT Department, Imaging Metadata Services Department. That's the ITIMS. So Imaging Metadata Services Department. Previously, the lead imaging technician at the Denver Public Library, Western History and Genealogy Department. Ruel has been at the Princeton University Library for 16 years and manages a team of 10 technicians. Hi, Ruel. Thank you for joining us. So on to our next panelist. It will be Chris Yoon. Let's see if we can get Chrissy up there on screen. Just wait 1 second here. Chrissy is the head of imaging services at UC Berkeley, and has been overseeing a staff of 5 imaging specialists and a number of student employees. Projects include a wide variety of physical formats, including books, microfilm, maps, photographs, slides, and negatives. So I'm going to jump over to Chris now and read his bio. Then I'm going to go back and ask specific questions for each panelist. So Christopher Ciccone works at the North Carolina Museum of Art, where he currently serves a dual role as collections photographer and digital asset manager. He currently is a co-chair of the Digital Imaging Special Interest Group at the Museum Computer Network, and he also provides art photography service for private clients, including artists, collectors, galleries, and other museums. So let's go back to Ruel first, just so we can get to know Ruel a little bit better. So Ruel, tell us just a little bit about yourself and the institution that's not in your bio.
Okay. The Princeton University Library has been it has quite a collection of various materials in it, and we are library centric. We're not we're somewhat closely with the art museum. Certainly, I know the staff over there, and consider them colleagues. And we're separate though, so there are two imaging operations there. My role at Princeton, well, I manage a team of 10 photographers who are doing great work. We work, again, principally with library materials, and in a non-COVID environment, we work on a project-based format where folks would propose projects and they would be vetted, and we would they would get into our queue and eventually come to the studio with various protocols. That's all changed in times of COVID, at least temporarily anyway. But that's generally what we have going on.
Nice. Can you describe the bulk material that you digitized?
Say again. Can you ask that again?
Sure. You might have to mute yourself for a sec because of the feedback. Ruel, can you describe the bulk of material your department digitizes and processes?
It's mostly, I mean, the vast majority are bound materials, rare books, manuscripts, that sort of thing. But we also do individual items. We do some artwork. We do scrolls. We've done coins. Quite a bit of photographs, both positive and negative, glass negatives, film negatives, film positives, you name it. I think we've done quite a bit of work, but obviously we don't do as much 3D work as our art museum counterparts.
It still sounds like you do quite a bit of photographic technique in your department.
Absolutely,
as well.
Everything is unique. A book is never as straightforward as you'd think it's going to be. It won't open well, or we have to make all kinds of adjustments, special cradles, special setups for different materials. Everything seems to be unique.
Her job at Berkeley. Chrissy, thank you again for joining us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for your great institution at Berkeley?
Hi, Prater. Thanks for having me.
Very welcome.
So before I was at Berkeley, I worked on the digital production group at Stanford University. And before that, I was at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. I started as a photographer at Berkeley just over 6 years ago. Our team digitizes the vast collections from the 25 libraries across campus, both circulating and rare and special collections. We work on large projects and patron-driven requests. Last year, we produced 1.5 million images, so we're doing a lot of stuff.
How would you describe your role at Berkeley?
So I'm the manager of the lab, so I'm definitely like managing projects and staff, but I also do photograph still, which is really nice. I work on some of the really fragile, complex things, although my staff also does. So it's a good mix from the day to day.
Nice. What percent of your time is behind camera now, you think?
Well, before COVID, it was probably about 5 to 10%, but now I'm managing remotely. So I'm working on processing more from home. Gotcha.
So can you just get a little bit more into like the type of materials that go through your shop?
Yeah, so I think a lot of what Raul was saying, that we kind of have everything as well. You know, we do a lot of oversized material, fold outs from oversized folios, double folios, triple folios. We do a lot of negatives, glass negatives, bound material, manuscripts, kind of microfilm. We have a large microfilm digitization going on. So we also do destructive scanning at Berkeley, where we disbind materials that were withdrawn, and then we use document feed scanners to scan them.
Digitization happens in the library versus like other departments and satellite setups. that I'm not attached to the
So there's
library?
actually only 2 satellite setups. The Environmental Design Archive, they have a staff photographer. We do digitize all the oversized material that he can't do on his DSLR copy stand. And then the Berkeley Art Museum, they have their own imaging lab. But besides that, we're pretty much the only ones digitizing across the campus. Yeah.
None? Last question about what you do at Berkeley. Do you think is most of your digitization efforts there, just through for scholastic reasons, or is it more grant based, on demand? I mean, how does it all happen?
Again, it's kind of everything. We do actually have a lot of grants. We do some vendor work as well, but our lab QCs the vendor work. And then, we have large projects going on. We have a lot of patron requests through all the libraries. A lot of patron requests come from Bancroft, which is a special collections in the main library. So
Yep.
Kind of it all.
Neat. Wow. Well, thank you for being a panelist today. Let me move on to Chris. Let's see here. Chris, thanks again for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your institution in your own words?
So the North Carolina Museum of Art is a state-owned art museum, first museum to establish a collection with state funds. And the museum opened in 1956. So it's got a very strong public mission, which I'm very proud to be a part of. We have a small collection, but it's pretty expansive. So it's not deep, but it's very wide. We have the collection started with a significant old European masters collection, and we've since added a significant Judaic ceremonial collection, and we are growing our African collection, and we have a really pretty strong contemporary collection as well. So we encounter a lot of different types of objects, and yeah. So
before your role at the North Carolina Museum of Art, were you always in like museum, kind of the fine art photography realm, or this is sort of a new direction?
My background before working in the museum was actually in the commercial realm, working primarily as a photo assistant, learning photography on the commercial side. I worked for a very large studio in metropolitan Detroit where we did basically all of the advertising photography for a large national retail chain, and that was a really high output environment, and I learned a lot there. But it's also very interesting now, being in the cultural heritage realm, where I find that the objective now is totally different from the objective in commercial photography, where you're trying to totally idealize your subject, and in the cultural heritage realm, you're trying to render it as neutrally and as accurately as possible. So it's a totally different mindset, but I really enjoy it. It's really great.
Neat. So aside from your role as running the department to photograph collections, what else do you do at the North Carolina Museum of Art?
Well, like you said, I'm the digital asset manager, so that means I'm in charge of basically administrating our DAMs, which is we're currently using Extensis portfolio. So it's my job to make images available, and we have a sizable amount of. We do a lot of in-house promotion, editorial stuff, social media. So there's a constant need for material, and there's a constant need for a pretty solid workflow for people to be able to get images that they need. We also do imaging for our conservation department. We have a full-time conservation department, so we do specialized photography. We do visible UV photography. We are doing some photogrammetry and RTI imaging for them, and we'd like to get into multispectral photography, but that's going to be down the way a little bit, I think.
Gotcha. So I gotta have a quick question about the asset management. I assume you're referring to the digital assets.
Yes, sorry. Yeah.
Does that also mean that you also have to deal with I imagine you have a huge store of photographic film taken of collections and galleries and so forth.
We do. And in fact, we're assessing our sort of legacy materials right now. As we'll probably talk about later, you know, in this time of like remote public presentation, we've got a huge demand for our archival materials. And we have a very rich history as a museum, and we have a ton of legacy materials that have never been digitized, black and white negatives, historical documents. And so we're right now assessing our sort of order of operations and prioritizing that. I was thinking that we would likely look for a grant to fund that and then maybe go through a vendor, but the situation now is such that we've got people that could use things to do. So it might actually be better to set up an in-house, you know, sort of triage, but we definitely are going to get going, getting that material out and available for the content creators in the museum to utilize.
So based on what you said, it sounds like the bulk of material you digitize or image today is for programmatic use, for example, exhibitions and research requests, and not sort of, you know, everything that's in the archives, every piece of paper, every piece of film. And
that's correct. Yeah, I mean,
effort.
a lot of the stuff in the curatorial files, you know, scanning it, they have staff that scans that stuff and keeps that. But as far as historical material, i.e., regarding the life of the museum, that's what we have, and we're gonna be digitizing that.
Well, I imagine you can't wait to get back in the doors and get into work because you have a lot to do. All right, so we've again, panelists, thank you so much for agreeing to do this today. It seems to make sense at this point that we have a bunch of questions that have been asked by the community, and particularly Angela Walrala, who helped put this all together. And the way we're going to do this, we're going to ask the questions to each of our panelists, and then we'll just take it from there. So, Roel, let's start with you. Okay. Sorry, I forgot to turn my webcam off. Well, it's all you. That way we don't have to share the video space. So,
Okay.
how long have you been back open or back at work? Your lab at Princeton. Exactly.
Well, I think Princeton will tell you we never actually closed. We just went remote back in March. So we've though have been back at work for a little over a month now, and all of our work has been focused on digitization to support fall online courses.
Okay, so that's yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So you're saying you never really closed, but getting access to your studios, how'd that work out?
Yeah, so it was like a time machine when we came back. You know, calendars were set to March, and things were thin layer. Everything was where we grabbed it and left. So it was odd. It was odd coming back into to work at this time, but eventually, coming back was great. I think it was much more planned than leaving.
Yep.
Certainly.
Nice. Chris, do you want to answer the same question? How long you've been open or back actually physically at your location?
Yeah, so same thing. Our university librarian actually says that we never closed. Part of that is because we've the digitization that we've done over the past 20 plus years. So we're also physically not open, but imaging services staff returned to on-site work on July 2nd. And we are borrowing colleagues from other units across the library, and they came back to on-site on July 10th.
So does that mean that, I imagine for order to digitize, it has to be material prep, right? They got to have certain metadata, stabilization. So did this happen in synchronicity, or did the material prep folks start first, and then you were brought back in? How'd that work out?
So actually, we're focusing on course reserves currently only, so that we can get material out to instructors and students. So besides that, we're also working on, as I said, the destructive scanning, the disbound material. That was that's always something that's been going. So we just have like a backlog of items for that.
Okay, so you didn't really need that many material prep folks there, and that's already queued up, ready to go.
Yeah, because the course reserves that we're scanning, they're only from our main library, which is adjacent to Moffitt Undergraduate Library, where our labs are. So you know, there's other staff paging the material for us, but it's kind of convenient because it's right there and everything is circulating. So you know, no weird you know, things popping up and nothing fragile, that type of thing.
So, Christopher, now that since you're at a museum, so it probably has a sort of a different set of needs and so forth. How are things going in terms of like getting back to work? Did you work remotely? What's happening at the North Carolina Art Museum?
I am going to work. There've been key staff that have been back for about a month now. We are in phase 2 of the state's reopening, and as a state museum, we will not be allowed to open to the public until we go to into phase 3. But we have so we've had a reopening pushback twice now. So we have our plans for the public pretty much set. As far as internally, because we're a state institution, we have to comply with both the state Office of Human Resources requirements and also the Department of Cultural Resources, which we are a part of, not to mention our own internal processes. Personally, I'm one of 2 photographers that actually is in the studio, and we alternate. So depending on what day of the week that objects or materials are scheduled to be photographed, one or the other of us will be in. So I feel confident about that, and our studio is remote enough that I don't really encounter anyone. I can go a whole day without seeing anyone else. So that's been nice. A lot of the other work, a lot of the post-production, a lot of the metadata, a lot of the derivative generation can be done remotely. So really just, I need to be there just to physically photograph objects. The art handlers have been there, and they're in a tough spot because they're charged with, we were in the middle of installing a huge show when we all got put on pause, and they are installing that with protocols that really slow them down. And so we're dependent on them as well for bringing materials to us. So what we've been doing is they will bring the materials in and then leave it for us, and then we'll take it from there. So there's really very little interaction, which makes it kind of weird, but it's, you know, it's safety first.
So let's proceed on this topic. You know, with Ruel. Ruel, now that you're back and you're in operation, I'm going to make the assumption, obviously, that protocols and guidelines have been adjusted. And who are setting these protocols? Is that your department? Is that, you know, health and safety? Is that the state? I mean, where does this come from, Ruel?
Well, yeah, that's our Well, it's certainly come from the governor. Whatever the governor has mandated. We're in phase 2. New Jersey is in phase 2 of reopening. So the guidelines and protocols are then come through the university administration, who set the guidelines for how we're coming back to work. The Office of Environmental Health has provided protocols for health and safety while we're back here in the library, and I think that's certainly all of the information that we've gotten is based on the best scientific data and recommendations so far.
Lines and protocols are coming internally, not so much from federal, state.
Well, they're certainly informing our where those protocols are coming from. But yes, the library itself has created its own set of rules and based on those guidelines. Obviously, the guidelines are for a general reopening, but how does that fit within the studio? Those are informed by a task force, a return to work task force for the library as a whole. But certainly we've created some for the studio as well. How we're handling materials, how we're conducting ourselves, and using social distancing, the wearing masks, wearing gloves. These are protocols that we've put in place. And adhere to as part of our workflow. So it's not just the studio; it's the folks who are bringing us the material, and also how they're handling it once we've given it back to them.
Question for you, Ruel. I mean, your technicians, does everyone have their own specific workstation, or do they share hardware?
So no, there's no. Everyone has their own workstation. We've staggered staff so that the staff is some folks are working in the morning, some are working in the afternoon, some are working different days, that sort of thing. But either way, they're not sharing equipment. They're not even sharing the materials. They're not sharing book carts. They each has their own book cart of materials to work from. They each have their own set of cleaning materials. They have university has provided gloves. We'll provide masks, though most are bringing their own. Yeah, we have our setup is such that each technician is one, can photograph at their own workstation, and two, when they're working from home, they can remote in to their own workstation and process and ingest those materials.
So I guess I'll move on to Chrissy. I imagine since you're back, that you must have had some protocols and guidelines adjusted, and how did this all come together? Did you have a large meeting with admin, or they just sort of pushed it down from the top?
Yeah, it kind of came from the top, actually at the campus level, even above the library. So UC Berkeley created multiple committees to work together and propose the next steps for everything from research, instruction to athletics. So they're definitely considering state, county, city guidelines when they made these decisions.
Your staff share workstations and book carts and materials, or everyone has their own siloed system?
So we actually have a Google Doc as a schedule. So on the schedule, we've tried to have 2 staff members assigned to one station. They actually, because we have like a TIS book scanners, and ergonomically, we can't have a staff member on that for 8 hours. So for 4 hours, they're on that station. And then for 4 hours, they're on destructive scanning. And then everyone goes to lunch, and then they switch. And it's the same 2 staff members that use the same 2 stations. We have 2 sets of those stations. Processing stations too, staff are assigned to a single station and they don't share stations.
Did you do you have to do like cleaning routine between stations, or that's, yeah? What do you use for cleaning?
Yeah, so we're pretty strict about the cleaning materials we're using because of the library collections and the camera equipment. So we're only using like Lysol disinfectant wipes for keyboards, mice, the computer table. But then when it comes to anything equipment, you know, like handles, on-off switches, we're using 70% isopropyl alcohol that's provided to us from conservation. And then when staff touch, you know, lenses for focusing and stuff, they'll use hand sanitizer. Every station has their own little bucket of cleaning supplies. They'll use hand sanitizer, nitrile gloves.
I imagine that's changed your production rate to a degree. All this cleaning, and so forth.
I would say so. I mean, we you know, we're really concerned about everyone's
course.
safety, so we make sure that everyone knows when they come in. You know, you spend some time cleaning, and then before you switch, you spend some time cleaning. So
Nice, thank you. Christopher, I'm going to ask you the same questions. I assume since you're at a museum, it might be a slightly different set of guidelines, whether or not they put you, I mean, you're more at the table defining those protocols, or how'd that work out for your organization and you?
Well, I commend our leadership, because basically each department that was coming back to work was allowed to basically generate their own protocols within the guidelines established by the state. So, for example, we worked out, you know, an alternate schedule. We worked out sanitization protocols and like divvying up equipment. Like some of the stuff has to be shared because we only have one of, but like Chrissy was saying, we've got, you know, gloves and hand sanitizers, and we're really on top of, I mean, there's only two of us, which is helpful. And so, and we're often there by ourselves. So it's not really a huge issue. And most of the time we're not handling the materials ourselves either. That's the art handlers or the conservators. So that's been pretty easy, and it hasn't really affected our productivity. What's really affected our productivity has been the reliance on art handlers to move the art and the objects to us, and because their productivity is severely depressed, we've had to adjust our schedule.
And I imagine the expectations from whatever you want to call the management, curatorial, that had to be adjusted as well due to the workforce.
Yeah, definitely. And I think everybody is understanding. I mean, we're all, you know,
Right.
doing the same thing. Nobody's really cracking a whip, and everybody's been really, I think, accommodating for people's needs. It's been nice. People.
That's great to have everyone kind of rowing in the same direction down the river, as they say. All right, so let's move on to the next set of questions. I'm going to switch the order up a little bit just to have some, you know, change of order. So we'll start with you, Chrissy. You know, since you have libraries generally have a pretty large staff for digitization, talk to me about your reallocation and how things have been impacted by you know, COVID, closing, reopening, and all that stuff.
yeah, so we actually have a large group of student staff, 8 currently. They had to be temporarily furloughed. No student staff are working at the library right now. So we were really fortunate that we were able to gain the help of 7 staff from across the library to help with the digitization. So we have the 3 imaging services staff on site and then 7 borrowed staff, and they all, we only have 4 staff members on site at one time, again, so that there's not too much interaction with one another.
I imagine their roles have changed quite a bit.
Yeah, so since I'm off-site, imaging services staff, they're actually site supervisors. So they're the ones that are, you know,
Mhm.
supporting the borrowed staff that don't have digitization experience, which has been really great, I think, for them.
Right, right. And Christopher, maybe you can answer the same question about the reallocation, you know, the impact and opening and closing and so forth.
We have unfortunately lost a bunch of frontline staff. We did, you know, we have a museum store and we have a restaurant. We have a couple restaurants. Staff has been let go. And I don't know what the future of that is. But as far as internal operations, we've had some losses in the development advancement department, but it's been pretty good. And that's largely because we are state employees. And I think the state is working hard to make sure that they don't have to furlough or reduce in force any staff. And it's not like we were overflowing with staff to begin with, you know. Everybody in the museum sector, I think I can safely say is doing more than one job. So we haven't lost anyone that's directly affects my work or the work of the imaging department, the visual research department.
I guess what I'm thinking is, are you being asked to do more with less? I mean, more roles or change roles with less resource? Is that the basic mode of operation?
No, I think the impact will be the next budgetary cycle, because we were just about to approve the next federal fiscal year budget. And our funding situation is interesting because we have a weird bicameral system. We're state-owned, but we're not funded fully by the state. So our programming gets funded by a private nonprofit foundation, a museum foundation. So we have two budgetary sources. The state source, which pays for salaries, is pretty safe. But the foundation budget, which pays for programming and a lot of equipment and, you know, hardware, software, support needs like that, is very tenuous right now. So, for example, we really desperately need to upgrade our main capture camera. We're currently using a phase 1, but we've only got like a 50 meg back that's like 5 or 6 years old, and we were planning on upgrading that this year. And I think that's still going to happen, but everybody's biting their nails about it. So
you have to kind of do with what you have, more or less.
we have to stretch out the resources we have right now, and it's more of a resource thing than a staffing thing.
So, Ruel, let's focus on your staff a little bit. You know, have you seen reallocation, and you know that's been impacted by all this stuff, like what people do and how they do it?
Well, the library as a whole has been incredibly fortunate in maintaining its existing staff. And in the studio, it certainly did. Certainly, our work went from being obviously photographers in the studio to working from home and doing other things. We were working in our digital repository and doing things like simple pagination of materials, more complex structural metadata as well. But in the studio, we've certainly, I don't know necessarily, I think their work remains the same, but how they're doing it is potentially getting to the heart of your question of reallocation. You know, working from home, getting more familiar, and certainly depending much more on IT services and being able to remote in and work from home. So at least our current staff will photograph when they're in the studio, and they focus on that. They focus on the photography, and then when they're working from home, they're remoting in, they're processing, they're ingesting. It's not super convenient, but it's when in a crisis and when health and safety are paramount, it's the work we have to do.
for example, about reallocation of staff. I'll just throw an example out there, and I could be completely wrong. So you have a lot of special collections at Princeton, which require a bit more, for lack of a term, attention to detail about photography, just for what the object is, because it's rare, versus circulation material, which is generally generic kind of scanning. Do you find that you're taking some folks that have more photographic skill and allocating them towards, I don't want to use the word menial tasks, but something that's a little bit more non-interesting and, kind of run-of-the-mill kind of work?
Well, I think that we've done some general collections material. The library is open for two priorities, by the way. It's for delivery of physical materials. We're actually circulating materials, as well as digitization, principally in preparation for fall. So I think that yes, we've digitized some of those general collections. We're instituting the idea that this fall students are going to not have access to the collections.
Mm-hmm.
So we will be digitizing, certainly helping out. There is a separate department that handles that type of material, but we'll be helping out due to an anticipated increase in those types of requests. So we've been digitizing some general collections materials. I wouldn't say it's a menial or anything. Certainly all of the work we do is in service to education and academia, whatever the material is. Certainly, some material is more fun to work with than others, but certainly all of the work we have as part of this new operation that we're obviously opening our doors to other types of materials, including our general collections materials.
That's good. Great. So let's start with, I guess, Chrissy, again on the next one. We talked a little bit about having to sort of change the mode of operation of your of how you interact with your organization and your staff. I imagine a lot of this you just kind of learn by practical common sense, but I imagine you also received quite a bit of training and guidelines and so on and so forth. I mean, was it kind of officially put forth through the University of Berkeley that said, okay, this is what we have to do, and then you take that and sort of make it fit to your particular department, or you just follow the rules to a T?
Well, so all returning staff have to take several campus sponsored online trainings in order to be granted on-site access. Additionally, all staff fill out a symptom checker questionnaire before coming to campus on the days that they're scheduled for on-site work. So I think, we're taking it pretty seriously again. So there's a lot of directional signs in the library. There's not that many of us. There's 4 to 5 imaging services people, but then there's also circulation staff working around. But the library is pretty large, so we're not really coming into contact with too many other people. So I think we're just trying to all work together to stay safe. So
you follow the rules and keep things practical minded, just because of unforeseen stuff. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Christopher, I imagine pretty similar for your shop. You have rules based on guidelines by the CDC, the state, and federal, and that you follow, and then modify where necessary.
Yeah, I think that the emphasis on, since the beginning of the lockdown, evidence seems to point to time of exposure and like air circulation as opposed to incidental contact with surfaces. So what we're really trying to do is just limit the amount of time that people are in enclosed spaces together, for the people that have to work with one another. Fortunately for us, we have a pretty substantial air handling capability we are adjacent to not only art storage, but conservation in our wing. So there's good air circulation. And I think really just the only adjustment we've made is really try to emphasize the not spending tons of time in an enclosed space with other people as much as we can.
What I've read, obviously, I'm not an expert in any of this, and it's hard to really know the truth really sits out there, but I heard it's 20x more. You have a 20x chance of getting COVID if you're in a confined space. And that's just, but I'm not sure if that's accurate or not. Ruel, I imagine you two have gone through some sort of formal training, rule, restriction kind of thing.
Yeah, the University Office of Environmental Health has set up a program that everyone has to take to come back to campus. We took it as part of our return, and then, as you said, it's we had to take those rules for social distancing, for hygiene, and form fit that into how we operate in the studio. So everyone has done that with the various departments that we've had to interact with. So we do Zoom conference calls with the conservation office. The folks who are paging the materials for us are also wearing masks and gloves. If we are handling materials without gloves, for whatever reason, a handful of items we've had to do that. We've let people know so that it can be properly quarantined before it's put back or handled by people who would put it back into the vaults. So I think those sorts of obviously these rules, everyone's been very diligent about adhering to them, and I will say that as many people have that we are working here in the studio, we're some of the few people who are actually in the library. So even now, you walk down the hallway, to the restroom or something. It is a very quiet, and we're the only ones in here. I won't say we're the only ones, but there's a limited number of people allowed in the building at any time. So I think those rules have certainly allayed a lot of the anxiety that people had about coming back as well.
And actually, kind of like really leads into the next question, was discovering the best way of maintaining social distance on site. So it sounds like Ruel says, it sounds like, we're human beings, so we're social people in general, so people like to be around each other. So that's obvious change for everybody. And it sounds like what you've done in your shop is like you're only around each other when necessary. So if there's a meeting, it's a Zoom meeting, rather than, hey, let's go someone's office and sit down and discuss this.
Yeah.
So Chris, do you share this? Do you have like the same mode of operation at Berkeley as well? You only have physical proximity to one another only when necessary.
Yeah, so I went in a few days before the staff returned with the help of some of the staff from IT, and we decided to move some of the digitization equipment out of the lab because, Peter, you've been there. It's just one big open space with a bunch of pieces of equipment. So a lot of the rooms in Moffett Library are empty right now since no one's there. So we moved our 2 ATIS book scanners and our 2 document feed scanners into separate rooms so that staff can be comfortable and by themselves. We also were doing a lot of communication via Zoom and Google Chat, Slack, phone calls. We also had to train new staff because this borrowed staff that we have, they weren't trained in digitization or photography. So imaging services staff created video tutorials for each piece of scanning equipment, and also provided some of our already existing written documentation. And the new borrowed staff seemed to really take to that way of learning, and we got some really positive feedback on that as well.
have you found that since people are not around each other as much, is that psychologically tough on them? You know, not to be in contact, not physical contact, but being kind of cordoned off to your own remote spot by yourself can get a little bit lonely, I can imagine.
Yeah, I think so. Although, we're all photographers. Sometimes we like to be in dark
Right.
basements by ourselves. So whether it's a dark room or a studio. So I think my team's okay. They're pretty happy that the two document feed scanners were moved to rooms with windows. So they have a lovely view of the Berkeley Hills now instead of being, in our basement. So that's probably helpful.
Good. I like the fact that they allowed you to reallocate equipment around campus that's not too far from your main lab, but yeah, it's really smart. Swing space, right?
Yeah, I mean, I will say there was some technical difficulties trying to reset up, but also the scanning equipment wasn't used for several months. So, the LED lights in our ATIS scanners had to be, we had to leave them on for a couple hours because they just were not, not trying to work properly. So cooperate. Yeah.
So, Chris, what about you? I mean, how have you dealt with the social distancing? I know that usually museum studios are pretty big. You don't need to work on top of each other as much, but I imagine you must have some protocols in place. I kind of like what Ruel said: when there's a meeting, it's a Zoom. Is that what you folks are doing?
Yeah. Where all of our meetings are virtual. Nobody's having in face-to-face meetings. That an institution-wide mandate. As far as our spaces, like I said, we have an alternating photographer schedule. So there's usually only one in there. We've had one instance where we had a very large object that required two people. And so what we did is we divvied it up. Like one photographer was at the capture station and basically doing QC, and the other photographer was moving lights. So we weren't touching the same stuff, and we were wearing gloves. As far as the materials coming in, we generally have at least a 24-hour quarantine in place for the things that come into the studio. So our studio is very secure. Like I said, it's attached to, it's adjacent to art storage. And so the registrars are comfortable with the art handlers bringing in a painting or an object into the studio while we're not there, and then it'll be there when we get there, and we're generally not handling it anyway. So that's been, I've been fortunate to work in a circumstance where I don't encounter a ton of people anyway, and we've been able to adjust to the circumstances.
Your answers kind of lead into the next question, which is great for me. So, Chrissy, I mean, in terms of like people's personal hygiene relative to COVID, not obviously this so to avoid infection. How do you handle that? Is there any issue with the handling of special collections? Have you put any protocols in place for that stuff?
So because we don't have to quarantine our materials because they've been in our spaces already. And during QC, we don't touch the object unless we absolutely have to. And then if we do, we wait a few days until that happens, or we use gloves. So that's been okay. We haven't really, we've been working with circulating material, although as I mentioned earlier, on table surfaces, we're only using isopropyl alcohols to, make sure that we're keeping it clean, but also not harming the objects. Some staff are using gloves too when they see fit. So I think it's been working out pretty well for us.
What does that mean?
Well, segregating the material first before others touch it. So we're not, there's no interaction between different people. The material has been on book trucks and we're just rolling the book trucks up to the digitization spaces. So we're wiping down the handles of the book trucks, but the material hasn't been touched by 4 to 5 months.
Okay.
So we don't really need to worry about
So
that.
if someone touches the material, say your staff is handling the books to photograph it or digitize it, whatever method you guys are using, and then for it to get back on the shelves, how long does that material need to sit before someone else is allowed to handle it?
So I think, so once it's digitized, unless it's absolutely necessary, we're not touching it for QC because a lot of these books are paginated, so we don't really need to physically touch them. But let's say it's paging staff that need to come get them. The books have been placed on the shelves days before they come to pick them up, so we don't really need to, set a guideline in that situation. They also, the paging staff, wear gloves. So again, if they're touching them after we've touched them, it seems to be working out well in that sense.
So how are you folks dealing with, making sure that materials don't get contaminated and people don't get contaminated and, contact whatever tracing for material?
Right. So prior to coming back, there was a task force put together that created some documentation on protocols for how we're going to do what we need to do. So and again, it was much more organized coming back than it was leaving. But in doing that, we were able to put some guidelines in place where we're wearing gloves, we're wearing masks. The people who are paging the material for us are doing that. We're doing it when we're photographing the material. Again, if we're handling it with bare hands because we can't quite get the dexterity with gloves that we need, we will note that this book should be quarantined before it's handled by staff who would reshelve it. So that's in some ways it's a bit belts and suspenders, but we're trying to be as safe as possible, and I think that it will be. It's beneficial to everyone. Obviously, safety is paramount here, and I think that we'll continue to do this and make adjustments as needed if we need to be more efficient somewhere. But as I said, the techs before have their own equipment, their own book carts that they're moving material with. They're retrieving it from the special collections department, and it is. I would say that these are rules that were created. They're not necessarily any new rules or anything like that, but they were created by the pandemic.
How you guys cope with all this stuff. So let's move on to the next set of questions here. I'm going to start with Christopher, just to kind of change up the order a little bit. Again, we talked a little bit about this already, but specifically, demands are changing in this so-called new normal. How do we keep up with it?
Well, I think that I have to say I'm really dismayed by the staffing cuts at other institutions I've read about, particularly digital staff. I mean, I can't fathom how anyone could see the immediate huge demand for digital content that was generated by the early stages of the lockdown and decide that's not a priority. But I think that we have to get I don't know, there's a lot that goes into producing digitization materials, and I'm not sure that people are aware of that. I think that people are so used to the internet and imagery on the internet is just sort of like a free resource, like tap water, that it's just there. It's like a natural resource. And I think that if cultural heritage institutions, libraries, I mean, I think doing a great job in giving a backstage look at what happens and what the process is like. There's some really, really great blogs and online publications from museums and universities that highlight this sort of stuff. But the more we can do to show that it's really a science and it's really quite involved, I think it's a matter of just generating public support for the resources to do.
I could totally see that. I mean, technically, a lot of these cultural heritage collections are built on tax levied money. So, and you can imagine that the public sphere wants access to their cultural heritage, whether it's the printed word or works of art and so forth. And honestly, they should have a right for it. And from where I sit, because you guys know I'm not in the cultural heritage sector, I just serve it. We do hear a lot of verbiage from institutions that their mission to digitize everything is just growing. Whether that happens internally by growing out their staff and facilities or outsourcing or whatnot. But we just kind of hear this kind of bubbling up from the community a little bit. So based on those thoughts, Aurel, what do you think about this? How to keep up with the potential tidal wave or tsunami of, man, everything's got to get digitized like right away? How do you handle that?
Well, I think that so far we've basically set priorities for what we're doing, and right now we have a tunnel vision focus for the fall on those. So that's how we said it. That's how we're prioritizing material: faculty, students who need research or materials for their research, as well as other scholars who are doing research around the world. We're prioritizing that material right now. I think that we'll see. That's the case. We're able to easily make those priorities because we're an academic institution. So we're working on coursework for the fall, and it will. And obviously the work is. There's been quite a demand. Certainly quite. I think more than they normally get as the semester approaches. And obviously, a lot of the material has dealt with some of the world events that are going on. So I think there's research on the virus itself. Certainly, a lot of materials dealing with racism and slavery throughout the years. Certainly, Princeton has a great collection of these materials. These are materials that we're very privileged to work with, and I think that it's helped us maintain that sort of focus on the work that we need to do for this upcoming semester.
So, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, obviously, you have to deal with what's right in front of you, which is.
I'm sorry, I lost sound there.
Princeton has to deal with what's right in front of them, which is their fall semester and satisfying the needs of students and teachers and researchers and so forth. Have you got any sense of the bigger picture, so to say, of, okay, how do we now in this new normal tackle this Herculean task of really converting everything to an accessible digital format? Well, that's too far out there at this moment.
Well, it's certainly. I think there's always been a desire to digitize as much material as possible and put it in front of as many people as possible. I think that we'll continue. Obviously, we'll continue to digitize and material, and I think that what this time has shown us is that there's much to be learned, or there's certainly a legitimate learning ability from having access to digital materials and learning online.
Going to be leaders in this community about how to actually get this all done, which is very fascinating. Chrissy, what do you think about that in terms of like, have you got that sense from Berkeley that, okay, you know, having general public access to actual materials is kind of a thing of the past, and now we need to really think forward a little bit here, how we're going to handle, you know, providing access to all this material in a reasonable manner.
I mean, I would hope that there will always still be a need for the physical material, but you know, Berkeley is taking the same approach that Princeton is. You know, we're also an academic institution, and the library itself is taking a phased approach. So like we're also focusing on the fall semester. So we're you know, digitizing circulating course reserves, content needed for instruction that's normally on reserve for the students in person. That's from our main library. We're submitting the items to Hathi Trust for their emergency temporary access services, ETOS, for UCB users online. So that's been really great. I mean, to make these collections available on Hathi. You know, right now we can't have access to the physical material. I mean, the next part of the phases is we're going to focus on research requests as well.
Thank you. So I'm going to skip the next question because we basically dealt with that in the previous section about balancing productivity and social distancing. But I kind of want to jump into a question I asked a little bit earlier. You know, how much productivity has been lost in terms of like, okay, a lot of times I know your departments are asked, you know, what production rates or how long does it take to do this project? You know, how much Christopher, how much, you know, productivity have you lost in your department? And has there been any discussion about increasing? And you kind of, you know, talked about this a little bit. What you really need is resource, you know, not only technology, but also maybe some back-end resources that kind of help make this happen.
Yeah, and I mean, that's always the case with cultural heritage. But like I said, we are, fortunately or unfortunately, we're not a high throughput operation. So our product, you know, we're not digitizing thousands of objects a day. So our productivity has been pretty stable. There's been, as on the digital asset management side, people are only able to access our digital asset management system if they are connected to the VPN, the museum's VPN, on either a personal laptop that's been vetted by our IT or on an institutional laptop. And so that sort of slowed down the distribution part. But as far as our digitization, it hasn't really affected our productivity.
From your perspective, in terms of, you know, getting so many, whatever you want to call it, widgets done per day based on the material type, and you know, I imagine you probably lost some productivity there due to social distancing procedures. And has there been any discussions about how to offset that loss?
I don't know about discussions at this point, but certainly, you know, all the data is being kept on, and I think that eventually they're going to say, how did we do, and what can we learn from this? But yeah, the productivity has been obviously it's not the most productive way to work in this way, but I will say, you know, I'm very proud of the group and how they've adapted. But by limiting the density of folks in the staff, the folks in the studio, it's allowed us, I think, to maintain that social distancing and still be productive. As I said, basically shooting, and then going home and doing the work that you would normally do as part of the photography. That you don't need the camera particularly. It's difficult. You don't have the material to to in front of you to say, wait a minute, what was I doing here? Why is this? Why are these two images this way? That's obviously not the most productive way to work, but it is what it is, because safety is paramount right now.
That's interesting. I wonder if that's going to change certain software features and so forth. That's kind of a little bit more remote work friendly, so to say. You know?
Absolutely, yeah. That's one thing that is that would certainly be beneficial. Now, I think that's the case with a lot of software out there.
Yeah. Chrissy, what do you think about that in terms of, analyzing productivity? Are you kind of in the same boat with Ruel, because you're in an academic environment and you're kind of like, let's analyze the data and then see what kind of plan we can come up with from there? Or are you trying to do more of, are there discussions about this already in place?
So of course, we've always kept statistics about production at Berkeley, and we will continue to do so. But our main focus right now hasn't been on production numbers. It's really been on safety. So we haven't really been talking about that. We're just trying to take, each day a step at a time. We also are in the situation where we have new staff that we've had to spend time training. So the imaging services staff, the trained photographers, they're not shooting as much when they're on site because they are aiding staff when they're on site. And then, when they're working from home, they're processing and also answer questions. So that's not really where our focus is, although we're aware of it, of course.
We're going to move on to our last kind of set of questions here. So trying to look at the positives of all this stuff and thinking out of the box, and I'd like you guys, if there's anything that something really positive came out of this, whether it's interaction with staff, how you work, or anything of that nature. So let's start with you, Royal. Can you think of anything positive that's come out of this event with in terms of your department?
Well, I think certainly camaraderie has grown. We're a good group, and it's nice that everyone has shown great concern for their colleagues and their families. I think we've come to have a great respect for our own and each other's adaptability, and I think certainly one of the positives that has come out of this is the importance of digitization has never stood out more. So I think that's a few of the positives that have come out.
Mm-hmm. So let's also jump to the next question to you as well. I mean, in terms of like morale boosting for your team, I know, at DT, just as a little microcosm of what you guys are, the fact that we're all kind of remote now, we all like to kind of hang out with each other. After, I'd say once a month we'd have a social with each other and have a drink and, have lunch together. And that's kind of, it's all now kind of, remote, it's not the same. So what can you share with us about, morale boosting the team and all that kind of stuff?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I think at least, we met when we were out of the studio, we met regularly just to keep in touch and see how everyone was doing. And we did have quite a bit of work to do while we were away. But you're right. I think that one of the great morale boosters was actually coming back and working with the materials and working with the equipment again. It just felt great to have somewhere to go other than the 10 feet between my bedroom and the and my desk where my computer was. It's also a morale booster to know that the work we're doing has been designated a priority, that it's important to research and scholarship, and I wouldn't say that it always has been, but certainly this crisis has emphasized that.
And I do share the same sentiment. I get kind of sick of staring at the same walls every day. It's nice to get a change of scenery. Chrissy, why don't you answer those questions? What do you thought's been positive coming out of this event with your department, and any kind of morale boosters that you could share with us as well.
I definitely think we've sharpened our communication as a group. I mean, having to constantly stay connected with one another is like really transformed the way we work together as a team, I think. On the same note, we were also working remotely, before we returned on site, and we were having, bi-weekly check-ins, and we would check in about the work progress, but I think it was really great for the team that we would talk about personal photography projects we were working on, or, off work topic interests and things, which was really interesting. We had like a camera show and tell, which was cool. We've also received a lot of acknowledgement from the university librarian and the other library community about the work that we've been doing to create the access to our collections. So I would hope that, that would be a good boost for the team. They're also pretty happy to be back on site. They were very excited.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Christopher, let's do the same questions at you. Any positivities coming out of this with your department? And I know your team is a little smaller, but there's still, still an issue dealing with morale and staying positive through all this.
Well, I'd like to echo Rael's comment that this situation is certainly proven the necessity of digitization, and it's totally elemental now to any institution's core operations. It's nice. I'll also say that it's nice at the times I get to go back to the museum. It's really rewarding. I mean, as much as I appreciate not having a commute every day, it's really reassuring to be back in the work. These beautiful objects, and to see people and to check up on them. We have my department has a bi-weekly Zoom meeting that we people are, and it's a mixture of business and how's everybody doing. And I think that, and again, I'll echo what's been said here, that it's nice to see people caring about others, and also this is really focused priorities, not only in everybody's individual work, but institutionally. Like it's really giving people the opportunity to see what's really, really, really important, because that's the work that's going to get done, and the other stuff, may or may not.
I mean, I can see that being very gratifying in cultural institutions. I mean, you do, warehouse and curate some of the most important things of the planet, really. So that's got to be very reassuring as well. Well, I have to say that's basically the end of our panel discussion, or the list of questions that we had from Angela and attendees. As I said before, DT, we never really felt that we're don't want to be, or really it doesn't seem correct for us to be the focus of continuing with these conversations. So we sort of recommend Image Muse as a good forum to keep this going offline if you don't want to ask questions, or just kind of keep this conversation moving forward. And so on the screen here is just go to imagemuse.org and you can sign up and keep this moving. So the last slide we have here are questions that were not asked by previous attendees to this panel discussion and to the general public, that we'll give a couple seconds to see if people have additional questions to ask our panelists. So, okay. So is this to Arnab? Is this to anybody, or to anybody specifically? Well, I'm not hearing anybody. Okay, I'll read the question. How successful is offsite processing given the processing power needed? Are files being worked by a server or external hard drives? What type of equipment are people using at their homes? This could be at any panelist who wishes to answer that question. So it's kind of a workflow question.
I'll
I'll say that for
no.
I'm
I was
sorry.
going to say
Go
you go
ahead.
ahead.
For for our workflow, the main processing power is simply just generating the master TIFF files in Studio, and then all of the derivative work we're working off a server through, like I said, a VPN. So occasionally there'll be a weird hang up and it'll freeze, but we're not doing anything color critical remotely. Any color work is done on site. So the remote work is either metadata or derivative, you know, making derivatives or ingestion
And
into the
I imagine
dams.
the derivative creation is more scripting than it is, anything else, right?
Yeah,
it's more of a
more
scale the
automatic.
file and push it out to a file format or to a file container.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Well, you had some more thoughts on that?
Well, I was just going to say we're a Mac outfit, and most of the techs use Macs at home, so that made it incredibly more convenient. I think that the library has actually provided laptops to staff in general, and certainly to our photographers where needed. A lot of techs have iMacs, so they had a nice big screen. Those who had laptops, we're working on getting them some monitors to take home, so they have a larger screen to do some of their image processing with. Our repository is accessible via remote, so certainly the folks are able to remote into their workstations here, connect to our repository, and ingest materials that way. That's the way it's worked for us. Again, it's not super convenient, but it does work, and it's helped us keep the staff who can't be in the studio at a certain time busy with work at home.
Alternating schedules on site. So photographers will shoot one day and then they take a hard drive home and they crop the files. Again, same thing that Chris said, that it's not color. We're not worried about color from home. That's all done in the studio. And then they come back and they actually upload on to our servers on site, just because we've run a lot of speed tests, and either remote desktop or trying to connect to the servers via the VPN is just so much slower. So if we can, we try to do it from on site.
Arnab, any more questions for the panelists? Okay, I'll read this out loud. I think this is open for everybody. Do you have any quarantine procedures for materials that are coming to you for imaging? And if that's the case, and if so, what does that look like, and how do you track time? It may not, Chrissy, this may not pertain to you as much because you already had a lot of material waiting for you. So let's leave this for Ruel and Christopher.
Well, our ideal is, like I was saying before, is to have the art handlers bring things in and have a 24-hour quarantine period. That's not always possible. But again, like we were talking about, I'm not as worried about contamination from an object as I am about, close personal contact. So we have an ideal, but it's followed as much as we can do that. And again, this is all determined by the availability of art handlers and their schedule, and they're really pressed right now.
We have we've started a Google Doc, a spreadsheet that lists our priority materials, and other folks are determining the priority for us. So they're paging the materials. Again, they're wearing gloves, they're wearing masks when they page it. Also, the time is noted when it was paged. It sits in an area where the book can be quarantined for up to 24 hours if necessary, or longer. Ideally, we'll return something maybe on a Friday, and it'll just sit there for the weekend, and it'll come back and it will be reshelved on Monday. So that's how we've set it up. We basically have, it's an ad hoc approach, but we're taking advantage of Google Doc to monitor what's coming to us, when it was paged and when it was returned.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Arnab, any more questions? Okay, here we go. Okay, is anyone working? I think it's been asked. I think we talked about this a little bit, but we'll go at it again. Is anyone working on materials that require more than one handler or photographer? I remember Christopher had an issue, had to deal with that. If so, how do you navigate that process?
Yeah, I'll just repeat that what we did is we just divvied up the responsibilities. We kept our distance, and like one person ran capture and one person did all the physical manipulation of lighting and lighting modifiers, and we handled it that way. The art handlers, I mean, they're doing what they can do. They've got heavier duty PPEs. They've got N95 masks, but they've got to. There are times when they can't avoid being within 6 feet of one another. So their hygiene protocols are just really, more extensive, I think.
You're an art handler, and you're doing like a Rodin bronze that's large. So you gear up with PPE and then just be very careful.
Yeah.
Ruel or Chrissy, I'm not sure if you have that same scenario where it requires multiple people, either handling it, photographing, or that's not the case in your environment.
I think at Princeton anyway, normally we would, pre-COVID, we would just simply take it to a different workstation and ask our colleague to work on it. But now we're just being much more mindful. Say if we're on a book easel, and there happens to be several foldouts in this volume, instead of passing it along to another colleague, what we're doing is reviewing the material before we begin photography on it, and it starts out at a workstation that could handle foldouts or bound material. So ideally, we're trying to keep material from changing hands as much as possible.
I imagine. I'm sorry, go ahead, Chrissy.
Sorry.
No, you go. Please.
I would just say that pre-COVID, we had a lot of oversized material that needed 2 staff members to handle. But since we're focusing on these course reserves right now, I think maybe that's something that's really good to think about for future when we do get back to shooting triple folios and really unwielding maps. But we don't have anything currently.
The requesters of imaging are cognitive of the situation and trying to limit oversized materials as well. Okay, this is the last question we have. Looks a little tricky here. Do you have any unionized staff, and were there issues having them return to work, or certain plans that need to be approved by the union? That's a fairly political one, but I think it's in the realm of something that we should address.
We are a right to work state here, so we're prevented by state law from unionizing. So no, we don't. But as state employees, we have a little bit more solid protections. And I think that the Office of Human Resources vetted our guidelines. We had to submit our guidelines to the State Department of Human Resources and our own Cultural Resources Division. So, I mean, I don't feel that we certainly weren't being having the whip crack to get back to work at any cost. I think that there was due diligence all the way up the administrative chain.
I think people just want to work in general, getting sick of being indoors all the time. So I appreciate that.
I agree. I think that it was certainly, again, getting back to morale. It was great to get back to work, but yes, the university here does have unionized staff, and there was I'm not privy to the negotiations that went on between library administration and the union, but there were initially when we first came back, the and the photographers, by the way, are part of that union. The first several weeks back were the techs were considered contributing to the effort to digitization. All the while still obviously still on the payroll, but officially came back as of July 6th, right after the Monday after the 4th of July. And that was again, I'm not privy to the negotiations that went on, but there were some for sure.
Thank you, Ro.
Yeah, we have some unionized staff in the imaging services department and in my larger department, IT. And I'm not sure what the negotiations were as well, but I'm sure HR and campus worked it out with the union. And also with us, as Chris said, no one was like, you have to come to work. I think it was a mutual discussion, and the unionized staff coming back to work on site.
That's great. Glad to hear that everyone's rowing together down the same river with each other. It's great to hear. Well, this really ends our panel discussion today, and I have to tip my hat to the panelists. You guys were fantastic. Great answers to all these questions, and really appreciate all your insights. And I guess there's really not much more. I'm not sure if any of the panelists want to, close with a thought or not. You don't feel obligated to do so. But again, thank you so much for doing this.
I would like to just reiterate your plug for Image Muse. It's a super great resource for people in our field, and I've probably learned as much through Image Muse as I have on the job. And also, I'd like to thank Peter, you and Digital Transitions, because your programming through this shutdown has been really super helpful, and I know I share that sentiment with people, with other people who are photographers, and it's been really useful. And
you're very welcome, Christopher. It's our pleasure. Thank you. Well, I guess it's about that time to let you enjoy the rest of your day. Those of us on the East Coast, not much left, but I know Chrissy has a little bit more day left in her day. So again, thank you for joining us, and till next time. Cheers, everybody. Stay healthy.